Today, we're looking at the most disturbing Gen Z killers ever sentenced. The ones judges decided were beyond saving before most of them were old enough to legally buy a drink. A 14-year-old who shot up his own high school purely for the fame of it, a 19-year-old who murdered his entire family as a warm-up for a massacre that never happened, and a teenager handed the second longest prison sentence in English legal history. Subscribe so you don't miss anything, and let's get into it. Welcome to Primetime Crime. Warning: viewer discretion is advised. Colt Gray, the infamy case. Winder, Georgia, 2024. On the morning of September 4th, 2024, administrators at Appalachia High School knew something was wrong. A student had been making comments that alarmed staff enough to pull him out of class. School officials and resource officers went looking for him. They found the wrong kid. There were two students with almost the same name, Colt Gray and Colton Gray. In the confusion, they intercepted the wrong one. And while that mix-up was unfolding in an office somewhere, a 14-year-old boy was walking through the hallway with a rifle inside his backpack. He fired into a math classroom first. Then he moved into the hallway. Teachers Richard Aspinwall and Christina Irami were killed. So were students Mason Schermerhorn and Christian Angulo. Another teacher and 8 students were wounded. It became the deadliest school shooting in the history of the state of Georgia. What separates this case from the others isn't the death toll, it's what came afterward. The rifle was a Christmas present. His father, Colin Gray, had bought it for him months after law enforcement had already been to their house because the boy had made threats about attacking an elementary school. Police had knocked on that door. They had been warned. And then a semi-automatic rifle showed up under the tree. In July of 2026, Colt Gray pleaded guilty to all 55 counts against him. Then came 3 days of sentencing, and that's where it got genuinely difficult to listen to. Prosecutors played recordings of jailhouse phone calls between the teenager and his mother. In one of them, he said, and this is close to verbatim, "Can you believe it, Mom? I took over Thomas Crooks in popularity." In another, he told her he was in the big leagues. He was tracking his own fame from a cell, comparing his body count and his headlines to other killers like it was a leaderboard. Judge Nicholas Prim did not soften it. He told the 16-year-old that he hadn't been bullied at that school, that he didn't hate anyone there, that he didn't even know a single person he shot. He said it was done for the infamy of it. He said Gray didn't seem tormented by any of it. He said he seemed proud of himself. Then he said the words that put this case at the front of this video. Your crimes reflect permanent incorrigibility. Life without the possibility of parole on every count. Families in the gallery gasped and started crying. The judge added one more line before it was over. He said the slain will not return to life, the injured will not forget their wounds, and a 16-year-old boy will live and die in prison. 2 days later, the boy's father was sentenced to 15 years for the rifle he handed over after being warned. Ethan Crumbly, The Journal, Oxford, Michigan, 2021. 4 days before the shooting, Ethan Crumbly was in a store with his father, picking out a handgun. He posted photos of it afterward. He wrote in a journal about wanting to see people suffer. He drew a picture on a math worksheet showing a gun, a bleeding figure, and the words, "The thoughts won't stop. Help me." A teacher found that drawing on the morning of November 30th, 2021. His parents were called into the school. They sat in a meeting and were told what their son had drawn. They declined to take him home. He went back to class with his backpack. Within hours, 4 students were dead. Tate Meyer, 16. Hannah St. Juliana, 14. Justin Schilling, 17. Madison Baldwin, 17. 7 other people were shot. He was 15 years old. Because he was a minor, Michigan couldn't just hand him a life sentence and be done with it. The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Miller v. Alabama forbids automatic life without parole for children. So, the state had to hold a special hearing, called a Miller hearing, and prove that this particular 15-year-old belonged in the rarest category of all, the ones who cannot be fixed. Over several days in the summer of 2023, prosecutors read his journals aloud in open court. He had written about targeting victims specifically to become famous. He had planned the timing. He had thought about it for a long time. A sheriff's lieutenant testified that Crumbly had bypassed the security on a jail tablet and accessed violent content while in custody awaiting sentencing. His attorney argued he was not irreparably corrupt and asked for a term of years, something that would leave him a door at the end of the hallway. Judge Kwame Rowe ruled that life without parole was on the table. In December of 2023, he imposed it. But this case didn't end there, and that's what makes it historic. Prosecutors went after his parents. James and Jennifer Crumbly were each convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, the first time in America that the parents of a school shooter were held criminally responsible for the killings themselves. They're both serving 10 to 15 years. Ethan Crumbly has been fighting his sentence ever since. In 2025, the Michigan Court of Appeals denied his application to appeal for lack of merit in the grounds presented. His new attorneys argued that his brain development was likely damaged by his mother's drinking during pregnancy, and that no one had raised it properly at sentencing. Prosecutors pointed out that the psychologist who testified for him never mentioned it. The appellate brief on his behalf contains a phrase worth sitting with. It called his sentence death in prison for someone 15 years old at the time of their offense. That's the argument. And it's not a stupid one. It's just running headfirst into 4 families who will never get a single day back. Jesse Osborne, the sentence that changed. Townville, South Carolina, 2016. This one belongs on the list for a reason that has nothing to do with how it started, and everything to do with how it quietly changed. Jesse Osborne was 14. On September 28, 2016, he shot his father, Jeffrey, inside their home in Anderson County. Then he took his father's truck, drove 3 miles, and crashed it through the fence at Townville Elementary School. He had gone there himself for 7 years. He opened fire on the playground, where a first-grade class was outside celebrating a classmate's birthday. 6-year-old Jacob Hall was struck in the leg, in an artery. He died 3 days later. His funeral was superhero-themed. 2 other children and a teacher were injured. Then the gun jammed. Prosecutors said Osborne had told an online group that he expected to kill 50 or 60 people that day. That group was later described in court as something close to a sleeper cell of would-be school shooters, teenagers egging each other on across the internet. The principal, Denise Fredericks, recognized him. He paced outside the building for 12 minutes with a backpack full of ammunition before police arrived. At sentencing in 2019, a psychiatrist was asked whether Osborne could be rehabilitated. His answer stuck with everyone in that room. He said anything under God's green earth is possible, but he wouldn't call it likely. The judge gave him life without parole, and here's where it gets complicated. In 2023, Osborne's lawyer went back to court and asked for the sentence to be reconsidered. He wanted 40 to 55 years instead, arguing his client had behaved well behind bars and deserved some hope of freedom in his 50s or 60s. Osborne stood up and apologized to Jacob Hall's family and to everyone at that school. The teacher whose class was outside that day, the principal, the parents, the prosecutor, they all said the same thing. He should never come out. The judge did something in between. He didn't restore parole. South Carolina doesn't permit parole for murder anyway. Instead, he converted the sentence into two 75-year terms. Functionally, it's the same outcome. A 14-year-old serving 150 years is not walking out of a prison. What it did was open a door to certain corrections programs he'd been shut out of. But it's still a change. A judge looked at a life without parole sentence for a child and adjusted it. That has become one of the most contested questions in American criminal law, and Jesse Osborne is sitting right in the middle of it. Nicholas Cruz, 9-3, Parkland, Florida, 2018. 17 people died at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School on Valentine's Day, 2018. 14 students, 3 staff members. 17 more were wounded. Nicholas Cruz was 19 years old. He had been known to the school, to the police, to the FBI. He'd been expelled. There had been reports. There had been calls. There had been tips. None of that is the reason his case is here. In 2021, Cruz pleaded guilty to all 34 counts of murder and attempted murder. There was no whodunit. There was no defense strategy about identity. The only question left was whether the state of Florida would execute him. His lawyers had offered a guilty plea back in 2019 in exchange for 34 consecutive life sentences. Prosecutors turned it down. They wanted the death penalty. So, Florida ran a 6-month sentencing trial. The jury sat through months of testimony about the shooting, about Cruz's childhood, about the fetal alcohol exposure his defense team argued had shaped his brain before he was born. On October 13, 2022, the jury came back. 9-3 in favor of death. Under Florida law at the time, a death sentence required a unanimous jury. 9-3 wasn't enough. 3 jurors found that the mitigating evidence outweighed the aggravating factors, and that was the entire ballgame. The verdict defaulted to life without parole. Families in that courtroom reacted with shock and fury. One father, Ilhan Al-Hadef, whose 14-year-old daughter Alyssa was killed, was openly devastated. Florida's governor said publicly that if you have a death penalty at all, this was the case for it. And then something genuinely rare happened. The law changed because of this verdict. In 2023, Florida rewrote its statute so that a jury only needs an 8-4 vote to recommend death. The unanimity requirement that saved Nicholas Cruz's life was removed, in large part because of the outrage over what happened in that Broward County courtroom. On November 2, 2022, Judge Elizabeth Scherer formally sentenced him. 34 consecutive life sentences, 17 for the murders, 17 for the attempted murders. Cruz sat there expressionless, while most of the families held themselves together. He is now in his late 20s. He will be an old man in a Florida prison, and the only reason he isn't on death row is 3 people in a jury box who couldn't get there. Whether that was mercy or malfunction is a question those 17 families have been arguing about with the state ever since. Peyton Gendron, The Trial That Isn't Over. Buffalo, New York, 2022. On May 14, 2022, an 18-year-old drove more than 3 hours from Conklin, New York, to a Top supermarket on Jefferson Avenue in East Buffalo. He was wearing body armor. He was live streaming. He killed 10 people. He wounded 3 more. Every person he shot at was targeted because they were black. Prosecutors laid out how methodical it had been. He had driven to that store twice before, scouting the layout and counting how many black shoppers were inside. He picked the location deliberately. Based on demographic data, he wrote it all down. In November of 2022, Gendron pleaded guilty to state charges, including domestic terrorism motivated by hate, the first conviction under that particular New York statute. At his sentencing in February 2023, he apologized to the families. He said he was sorry for stealing the lives of their loved ones. He said he shot people because they were black. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For most of the killers in this video, that would be the end of the story. For Peyton Gendron, it was the beginning of a second one. New York has no death penalty. The federal government does. And the U.S. Department of Justice charged him with federal hate crimes, which carry capital punishment if murder is committed with a firearm during the offense. Gendron's lawyers offered to plead guilty to everything if the death penalty came off the table. The government said no. So a case that was, in every practical sense, already resolved, has been grinding through federal court for years. His defense tried to move it to New York City, arguing he couldn't get a fair jury in Western New York. They asked the judge to strike the death penalty entirely, claiming the decision to seek it was discriminatory. They fought over aggravating factors, and in July of 2026 the Second Circuit reinstated 3 of them, including the finding that the killings were racially motivated and that he intended to incite others to do the same. Roughly 1,200 prospective jurors were called and handed lengthy questionnaires. Jury selection began, then got pushed. As of now, it starts in October of 2026. Outside the courthouse, death penalty opponents have rung a bell in protest, arguing that the federal government is spending millions to seek an execution in a state that abolished capital punishment, against a man who is already never getting out. Families of the 10 victims are split. Some want him executed. Some just want it to stop so they can grieve without a court date on the calendar. Whatever that jury decides, one thing is already settled. Peyton Gendron is never leaving prison. The only remaining question is how he leaves it. Robert Crimo III, The Empty Chair, Highland Park, Illinois, 2022. Highland Park is about 30 miles north of Chicago. On July 4th, 2022, the town was doing what it does every Independence Day: a parade, a marching band. Families with folding chairs on the sidewalk. A 21-year-old climbed onto a rooftop with a rifle and fired 83 rounds into the crowd in under a minute. 7 people were killed. 48 were wounded. The victims ranged from an 88-year-old man down to an 8-year-old boy named Cooper Roberts, who was paralyzed from the waist down. In his police confession, Robert Crimo III was completely flat. He described a gun malfunction that made him hesitate, and then said he decided to go through with it anyway. He said he walked up the stairs, jumped on the roof, and opened fire. A Highland Park officer testified that Crimo stayed disturbingly calm during the interview, and that he laughed and joked at points. He had planned it for years. The case took a strange turn when Crimo, at one point, decided to represent himself, then reversed course. In March of 2025, moments before his trial was set to begin, he changed his plea to guilty on 21 counts of first-degree murder and 48 counts of attempted murder. Then came the part nobody expected. He refused to show up to his own sentencing. Survivors and families had spent nearly 3 years preparing to address him directly. They had written statements to read to his face, and he simply declined to be brought into the courtroom twice on both days. They read them anyway. Leah Sundheim, whose mother Jacqueline was killed, said he had thrown the balance of the world off. She told him she hoped he woke in the middle of the night gasping for air he didn't deserve. Her father called it a violent tantrum that had destroyed their family. Judge Victoria Rossetti called him irretrievably depraved, permanently incorrigible, and beyond any rehabilitation. She said, "What remains a mystery is why he did it at all." 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, 1 for each person he killed, plus 50 years for each of the 48 attempted murders. He was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center the very next morning. The Lake County Sheriff put out a statement noting how quickly his team had gotten him processed and moved to the place he will spend the rest of his life. 2 years before all this, Crimo's father had been sentenced to 60 days for reckless conduct, for signing the paperwork that let his son get a firearms card. He served about a month. The mother of Cooper Roberts, the boy who was paralyzed, issued a statement after the sentencing with one line that landed harder than any verdict. She said she and Crimo had exactly one thing in common. They were both serving life sentences without parole. Anderson Lee Aldrich, 55 life sentences. Colorado Springs, Colorado, 2022. Club Q was a small LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs. For a lot of the people in that building on the night of November 19, 2022, it was the safest room they knew. A 22-year-old walked in with a privately manufactured assault-style weapon and started firing. 5 people were killed. Raymond Green Vance, 22. Daniel Aston, 28. Ashley Paw, 35. Derek Rump, 38. Kelly Loving, 40. 19 more were injured. The shooting stopped because the patron stopped it. Customers inside that club tackled the shooter and held him down until police arrived. That is the only reason the number wasn't higher. Aldrich had visited Club Q multiple times before the attack. Prosecutors said it was a willful, deliberate, malicious, and premeditated plan, and that Aldrich had previously expressed hatred toward police, toward LGBTQ people, and toward minorities. In June of 2023, Aldrich pleaded guilty in Colorado State Court to 5 counts of murder and 46 counts of attempted murder, and no contest to 2 counts of bias-motivated crimes. 5 consecutive life sentences, plus 48 years for each attempted murder count. Then the federal government came. 50 hate crime charges, 74 counts in total. And this time, capital punishment was genuinely on the table. In January of 2024, prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off in exchange for a full guilty plea. On June 18, 2024, Aldrich pleaded guilty to all 74 federal counts and admitted in writing that the attack was motivated by the actual or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity of the people inside. U.S. District Judge Charlotte Sweeney, the first openly LGBTQ federal judge in Colorado, handed down 55 concurrent life sentences to run consecutively to 190 additional years. 55 life sentences. It's a number that stops sounding like a punishment and starts sounding like a statement. Several families told the court they had wanted the death penalty. Judge Sweeney explained she had no discretion because of the plea agreement. Aldrich refused to apologize or say anything at all to the victims' families. But one moment from that hearing has outlived everything else about it. Wyatt Kent had been performing in drag at Club Q that night, celebrating his own birthday. He lost his partner, Daniel Aston, in the shooting. And when he spoke to reporters outside afterward, he said he wanted to extend words of forgiveness. He said he hoped this person could find clarity and peace and a sense of their own life, and then acknowledged that it would happen behind bars. Aldrich is now in his mid-20s, serving a state sentence, a federal sentence, and stacked years that outlast several human lifetimes. Robert Aaron Long, 2 verdicts, Georgia, 2021. On March 16, 2021, a 21-year-old from Woodstock, Georgia, walked into a gun store in Holly Springs at 2 in the afternoon and bought a pistol and ammunition. He later told police his plan at that moment was to take his own life. Instead, he drove to a liquor store, bought bourbon, and sat in his car outside a massage business near Ackworth drinking it. At 4:54 p.m., he went inside and started shooting. 4 people were killed. A 5th was injured. Then he drove 30 miles south into Atlanta. At 5:47 p.m., police responded to Gold Spa on Piedmont Road and found 3 women dead. Across the street at aromatherapy spa, they found a fourth. 8 people were killed in total across 3 locations. 6 of them were women of Asian descent. Long was caught the same night, roughly 200 miles south, when Crisp County deputies spotted his SUV on Interstate 75, and Georgia State Patrol troopers stopped him with a pit maneuver. He confessed almost immediately, and his stated motive is where this case fractured the country. He said it wasn't racial. He said he had a sex addiction, and that the businesses were temptation he needed to eliminate. Almost nobody outside that interrogation room accepted it. The attacks landed during a national wave of violence against Asian Americans, and the idea that a man could drive between 3 Asian-owned businesses, kill 6 Asian women, and have it categorized as something other than racially motivated struck millions of people as absurd. In Cherokee County, Long pleaded guilty to the 4 killings there. He received 4 consecutive sentences of life without the possibility of parole. Cherokee's district attorney did not pursue hate crime charges, noting that one victim there was Hispanic and another was white. And then Fulton County did something almost unheard of. Fulton County prosecutors decided to try him separately for the 4 Atlanta killings and to seek the death penalty under Georgia's hate crime statute. Their position is that a sex addiction defense does not neutralize the fact that all 4 Fulton victims were Asian women, and that the targeting itself constitutes a hate crime. Long has pleaded not guilty in Fulton County. He's now 26 years old, already serving 4 life sentences, and still facing execution for a crime he has already admitted to. The case has crawled. In 2026, the judge overseeing it complained openly that they were at an impasse because Long didn't have 2 attorneys qualified to handle a death penalty case. Hearings kept getting scheduled and rescheduled. 5 years after the shootings, the case still had no firm trial date. So here's where this one sits. A man who will die in prison no matter what, being pursued for a death sentence over a legal question about why he did it. That's not a technicality. For the families of Soon Chung Park, Han Jung Grant, Suncha Kim, and Young A Yue, the difference between a man who killed their mothers and a man who killed their mothers because of who they were is the entire point. Before we go on, I want to ask you something, and I'd like an actual answer in the comments. Colt Gray was 14. Ethan Crumbly was 15. Jesse Osborne was 14. Mason Sisk, who's coming up next, was 14. Every one of them was told by a judge that they are, and I'm quoting the legal language here, permanently incorrigible, beyond rehabilitation, finished as human beings before they finished growing. Do you believe a 14-year-old can be beyond saving? Or do you think a system that decides that about a child has stopped doing justice and started doing something else? There's no clean answer. Tell me yours. Mason Sisk, The House on Ridge Road, Elkmont, Alabama, 2019. Just south of downtown Elkmont, Alabama, about a mile out on Ridge Road, there was a house with 7 people in it. On September 2nd, 2019, 5 of them died. John Wayne Sisk, 38, a mechanic and a hairdresser and a motorcycle guy. Mary Sisk, 35, a special education teacher who was planning to go back for her doctorate. Their children, Kane, who was 6, Aurora, who was 4, and Colson, who was 6 months old. All 5 were shot in the head. The 14-year-old who called it in told police he had been in the basement playing video games when he heard gunshots, and that he ran outside and saw a vehicle driving away. That story lasted a matter of hours. He later admitted to investigators that he did it. When they asked him why, he said his parents argued a lot and he got fed up with it. He said the kids were going through a lot. The kids were 6, 4, and 6 months old. The prosecution of Mason Sisk took 4 years and 2 trials. The first one collapsed into a mistrial when the FBI finally cracked the password on his stepmother's phone in the middle of proceedings. The second trial ran in April of 2023, and the jury needed 2 hours. Guilty on 4 counts of capital murder, 1 for killing multiple people, 3 more for killing children under the age of 14. He couldn't face the death penalty because he was 14 at the time. So, Limestone County Circuit Judge Chad Wise had exactly 2 options: life with the possibility of parole after 30 years, or life without parole forever. He held a 4-hour hearing in July of 2023 and then took 6 weeks to decide. When he came back, he read his order aloud from the bench for 25 minutes. He called the killings ghastly, disturbing, and draped in unmitigated evil. He wrote that the circumstances were far more appalling than other juvenile cases where appellate courts had upheld life without parole, and that these facts were meaningfully different from other capital murders committed by juveniles in Alabama. Life without parole, on all 4 counts. Sisk did not react. He didn't make a statement. He turned 19 on Christmas Day that year. Afterward, the Limestone County District Attorney told reporters something that has followed this case ever since. He said he'd prosecuted a lot of people in his career, and that out of all of them, only a handful genuinely scared him, and that Mason Sisk was at the top of that list. His appeal was denied by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in a 17-page memorandum. A motion for a new trial had already been dismissed in 2 paragraphs, with no explanation offered. Chandler Halderson, The Lie That Ran Out, Windsor, Wisconsin, 2021. Chandler Halderson wasn't a violent kid. There was no history, no record, no warnings. What he had was a story he'd been telling for years, and it was starting to come apart. He told his parents he was enrolled at Madison Area Technical College. He wasn't. He told them he had a job lined up with SpaceX. He didn't. He built a whole architecture of achievement out of nothing, and he maintained it the way people maintain a lie that's grown too big to kill, by adding to it. Then his father, Bart, scheduled a meeting at the college. An actual meeting, with actual staff, on an actual date. The kind of thing a lie cannot survive. On July 1st, 2021, on the morning Bart was planning to attend that meeting, Chandler shot him in the back with a high-powered rifle a friend had given him. Then he texted his mother, Krista. When she came home, he killed her too. Then he dismembered both of them and scattered the remains across 2 counties. He tried to burn some of it in the family fireplace. On July 7th, he reported his parents missing. He told police they had gone up to the family cabin in northern Wisconsin for the 4th of July weekend and never checked in. Detectives started making calls to verify the story. The cabin story didn't hold. The college story didn't hold. The job story didn't hold. Hundreds of pieces of physical evidence eventually stacked up against him, and the thing that unraveled it all wasn't forensics. It was that everything Chandler Halderson had ever said turned out to be untrue. Human remains belonging to Bart were found in rural Dane County the day after the missing persons report was filed. Chandler was arrested that night. Krista's remains were found about a week later. His trial in January of 2022 lasted several weeks. His defense called no witnesses. He did not testify. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. At sentencing on March the 17th, 2022, his defense attorney argued that his age, 24, meant he should be given some chance at eventual parole. His own grandmother, Kayleen Halderson, gave a victim impact statement in which she said she hoped he'd have that chance. Judge John Highland said no. He told the courtroom that he could not grant Chandler Halderson the same spirit of empathy and generosity his own grandmother had given him. Then he said that his obligation was to ensure that the only time Halderson comes back into the community is to have the privilege of a burial he denied his own parents. Life without parole. Halderson then spoke publicly for the first time in the entire case. He read a short written statement asking any lawyers watching to please reach out and take his appeal. He also said his silence shouldn't be read as a lack of feeling, that he'd been warned not to show emotion because of the scrutiny on the case. The Wisconsin Court of Appeals affirmed his conviction in November of 2025. The Wisconsin Supreme Court declined to review it. He killed both his parents to avoid a meeting. Samuel Woodward, the second date, Orange County, California, 2018. Blaze Bernstein was 19. He was a pre-med student at the University of Pennsylvania, home in Orange County for winter break, staying with his family in Newport Beach. On the night of January 2, 2018, an old high school classmate picked him up. They had gone to the same school, the Orange County School of the Arts. They had reconnected on a dating app in the months before. That night, they drove to Borrego Park in Lake Forest. Blaze never came home. His family reported him missing. A search ran for days. His body was found buried in a shallow grave in that park. He had been stabbed 28 times. Samuel Woodward, then 20 years old, was arrested. And when investigators searched his phone, the case turned into something much larger than a killing in a park. His devices contained a mass of anti-gay and anti-Semitic material. Prosecutors established his association with Atomwaffen Division, a neo-Nazi group. The prosecution's theory was that Woodward had murdered Blaze Bernstein because Blaze was gay and charged it as a hate crime. The trial ran for months in 2024, and the central question was never whether Woodward had killed him. He admitted that. The question was why. Woodward testified in his own defense. He said he had picked Blaze up, gone to the park, and stabbed him after trying to grab a phone he believed had been used to photograph him. His attorney, Ken Morrison, argued something more complicated. He told the jury that Woodward had grown up in a politically conservative and devoutly Catholic household where his father openly condemned homosexuality, and that Woodward himself was profoundly confused about his own sexuality. In July of 2024, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder and found the hate crime enhancement true. Specifically, they found he killed Blaze because of his sexual orientation. Jurors were also shown evidence of his extremist ties as a broader pattern of bigotry. The verdict carried a mandatory sentence: life without the possibility of parole. The sentencing hearing in November of 2024 was delayed roughly 5 hours, partly because Woodward refused to leave his jail cell. When he was eventually brought in, he stormed out of the courtroom during the victim impact statements. Judge Kimberly Menninger's remarks were unusually reflective. She described 2 young men from the same high school, one smart and funny and successful with a huge circle of support, and the other intelligent and full of promise but struggling with his identity, his mental health, and his loneliness, and never receiving the psychological help he so clearly needed. She said it was sad that 2 people from the same school had ended up on opposite ends of a culture war. Then, she said the hate that fueled his thoughts was deeply disconcerting and reflected a larger societal illness. Outside the courthouse, Blaze's mother, Jean Pepper Bernstein, said she never thought she'd smile again, but that she stood there relieved that this man would never leave a prison in Orange County again, or murder anyone else's child. Aiden Fucci, no reason at all. St. Johns County, Florida, 2021. Every case in this video has a why attached to it. Fame, hate, money, rage. A lie that ran out of road. This one doesn't. Tristan Bailey was 13 years old. She was a cheerleader. She lived in the Durbin Crossing neighborhood in St. Johns County near Jacksonville. On Mother's Day weekend 2021, she was out late with a group of kids, and at some point in the early hours she walked off with a 14-year-old boy from her school. Aiden Fucci led her into a wooded area. Her body was found on May 9, 2021, the same day she was reported missing. The medical examiner counted 114 wounds. 49 of them were defensive, which is the clinical way of saying she fought for a long time. Fucci was arrested almost immediately. Evidence surfaced showing he had talked about wanting to kill someone before that night, and after it, he sent a message on Snapchat effectively bragging about it. He pleaded guilty in February of 2023, days before jury selection was due to begin. At sentencing in March, Circuit Judge R. Lee Smith said something that has stayed with people who followed this case, because he was trying to explain an absence rather than a motive. He said this was not an immature or impetuous crime. He said what was also very troubling was that this crime had no motive. Not greed, not retaliation, retribution, or revenge, not passion, not rejection, not a fit of uncontrollable anger. He said there was no reason. The prosecutor put it more bluntly. She told the court that it was only a matter of time before Fucci did what he had repeatedly said he wanted to do, and that all that remained was a when and a who. She said his when turned out to be May 9, 2021, and his who turned out to be Tristan Bailey. Because he was 14, the death penalty was off the table. His attorneys asked for 40 years. The judge gave him life, the maximum available. Under Florida law, because he was a juvenile, that life sentence comes with a mandatory review after 25 years. It is not parole. It's a hearing where a court examines his progress and his risk. He'll be in his late 30s when it happens. He appealed. In 2025, Florida's 5th District Court of Appeal affirmed the conviction and the sentence in full, correcting only a clerical issue about a public defender fee. The court's order restated the facts plainly. He lured the victim to a secluded place in the woods. He stabbed her over 100 times. He inflicted 49 defensive wounds. There's a version of a true crime story where understanding the motive gives you something to hold on to. A reason, however ugly, that makes the world make sense again. Tristan Bailey's family didn't get one. A judge stood up in open court and told them, on the record, that there wasn't one. Denali Bramer and Darren Schillmiller, The $9 Million Lie, Anchorage, Alaska, 2019. Cynthia Hoffman was 19. Everyone called her Cece. She was developmentally disabled, and she trusted people completely. She thought Denali Bramer was her best friend. Here's what was actually happening. Bramer, then 18, had been talking online to a man in New Salisbury, Indiana, who called himself Tyler. He told her he was a millionaire. He told her he would pay her $9 million if she killed someone and sent him photos and video of it. He wasn't a millionaire. He was Darren Schillmiller, 21 years old, living in his grandparents' basement in Indiana. He had $9 million in exactly the same way he had a different name. Bramer believed him. And then she recruited her friends. She offered them cuts. Caden McIntosh, 16, believed he was getting $750,000. Caleb Leyland lent his vehicle. Others were pulled in around the edges. None of them were getting anything, because none of it existed, but they didn't know that. The day before it happened, Bramer wrote a note about Cynthia and then deleted it. Investigators recovered it anyway. In it, she described her friend as very trusting, and noted that it was her fault, and that she was also very gullible. She wrote that those traits would make it easier to get her out to the falls. On June 2, 2019, the group invited Cynthia on a hike at Thunderbird Falls, a popular trail just north of Anchorage. They went off the marked trail and down toward the Eklutna River. There, Cynthia was bound with duct tape. Caden McIntosh shot her once in the back of the head. Her body was put into the river. Then Bramer texted Cynthia's family to say they had dropped her off. Police found her 2 days later. Judge Andrew Peterson said at more than one of the sentencings that the video of Cynthia Hoffman's final moments was one of the hardest things he has ever had to watch from the bench. The sentences rolled out over 2 years. Darren Schillmiller pleaded guilty to solicitation to commit murder in the first degree. 99 years, January 2024. He also faced federal charges for exploiting a minor, conduct entirely separate from the killing, and drew 30 additional years in federal court. Denali Bramer pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. 99 years, February 2024. The judge called it a premeditated murder for hire, cold, calculated, and carried out to a T. He noted that she showed no remorse afterward, and that she went on to commit further crimes at Schillmiller's direction. He acknowledged that youth matters, then said plainly that this was not a youthful indiscretion. She received 30 years federally as well. Caleb Leyland got 30 years to serve, and Caden McIntosh, the one who actually pulled the trigger at 16, was the last of them, sentenced in November of 2025. 85 years with 15 suspended, 70 years to serve. He apologized to Cynthia's family in court and said he knew it didn't cut it, that he didn't expect forgiveness, and that he was trying to take accountability. Cynthia's uncle, Don Hoffman, spoke to the Anchorage Daily News afterward. He said it wasn't what they wanted, but they were satisfied. He said the man who killed his niece is going to be an old man when he gets out. 4 young people are serving what amount to life sentences because a stranger on the internet promised them money he never had. Let me ask you the second one now, because this case is where it gets uncomfortable. Denali Bramer was manipulated by an adult predator who lied about everything. That's real. It happened. Her lawyer argued exactly that in court. She also picked the victim. She wrote down why her friend would be easy to lure. She texted the family afterward to buy time. Where does being groomed end and being responsible begin? If someone talks you into the worst thing you'll ever do, does that make it less yours? Comment below with what you'd have given her, and be honest about it. Nathaniel Veltman, The Truck, London, Ontario, Canada, 2021. On the evening of June 6, 2021, the Afzal family went out for a walk in London, Ontario. Salman Afzal, 46, a physiotherapist. His wife Madiha Salman, 44, an engineer finishing a PhD. Their 15-year-old daughter Yumna, an artist. And Talat Afzal, 74, the grandmother, a teacher and a painter. Their 9-year-old son was with them. A 20-year-old named Nathaniel Veltman saw them standing at an intersection. He did not know a single one of them. He believed, based on their clothing, that they were Muslim. He drove his pickup truck into them at full speed and never touched the brakes. 4 of them died. The 9-year-old boy survived, seriously injured, and orphaned in the space of a few seconds. Justice Renee Pomerantz later laid out the planning. In the months before, Veltman had bought a new truck. He had bought a large grill guard for the front of it. Police recovered a piece of paper on which he had written out vehicle speeds alongside the percentage likelihood of killing a pedestrian at each one. He had done the math. The trial ran 10 weeks in Windsor in 2023 and produced a verdict of guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Then came the part that made legal history in Canada. Under Canadian law, first-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years. There is nothing harsher available. So the sentencing hearing wasn't really about the number. It was about a word: terrorism. In February of 2024, Justice Pomerantz ruled that Veltman's crimes constituted terrorist activity. She called it a textbook example of terrorist motive and intent. It was the first time in Canadian history that a case involving white nationalism met the legal threshold for terrorism. She also made two choices that are worth noting. She refused to use his name in her decision, and she refused to repeat what he had said to police the night he was arrested. Her stated reason was that people who commit terrorist acts hope and plan for exactly that kind of coverage. She rejected the defense submission that his mental state should be a mitigating factor, pointing out that the psychologist who testified had been forbidden by Veltman himself from speaking to his mother or siblings or accessing his medical records. The diagnoses were based entirely on what he told them. 71 victim impact statements were entered over 2 days. The last one read into the record belonged to the orphaned boy, who was 11 by then. Veltman apologized at sentencing. The family rejected it. He filed an appeal, challenging his convictions and asking for a new trial, arguing the judge wrongly admitted his ideological writings and his statements to police. He'll be in his mid-40s before he can even apply for parole. And he'll be applying as the first person in Canadian history convicted of terrorism motivated by white nationalism. Isa al-Hassan, the Festival of Diversity, Solingen, Germany, 2024. The city of Solingen in western Germany was celebrating its 650th anniversary. They called it the Festival of Diversity. On the evening of August 23, 2024, the Fraunhofer marketplace was packed with people dancing. A 26-year-old Syrian man walked into that crowd with a knife. 3 people were killed. 10 more were injured, several critically. He disappeared into the chaos, and a 24-hour manhunt followed before he turned himself in to police. He was born in Syria in 1998. He had arrived in Germany in December of 2022 as an asylum seeker, traveling the Balkan route through Bulgaria, and told authorities he had left Syria to avoid military conscription. He was housed first in Paderborn, later in Solingen. His asylum claim was rejected. Deportation proceedings began in June of 2023. He was supposed to be returned to Bulgaria, and then, according to German reporting, he simply left the accommodation in Paderborn, and no serious attempt was made to find him again. He had not been known to German security services as an Islamist before the attack. But the court later found he had been radicalizing since 2019, spreading Islamic State propaganda on his own TikTok account. Islamic State claimed responsibility. It was the first attack in Germany they'd claimed since the Berlin Christmas market in 2016. At the opening of his trial in May of 2025, he did something almost no defendant in this video did. He confessed immediately through his lawyers. He told the court he had brought severe guilt upon himself. He said he had killed innocent people, not infidels. He said Jews, Christians, and Muslims are not enemies. He said he expected a life sentence and would accept it. He also offered a motive, which the court heard toward the end of proceedings. He said he could not stand watching people dance in Germany while children were being killed in Gaza. On September 10, 2025, the Düsseldorf court convicted him of 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and membership in a foreign terrorist organization. And then the German legal system did the thing it almost never does. In Germany, life imprisonment usually functions differently than it does in the United States. In most cases, a person serving life becomes eligible for release consideration after 15 years. Life does not typically mean life. The court made a formal finding of besonder schwere Schuld, which translates roughly as particularly serious guilt. That finding removes the 15-year eligibility. On top of it, the court ordered preventive detention to follow the prison sentence, which means that even at the theoretical end of the term, he can be held indefinitely if he is still considered dangerous. The panel found that his radical Islamist convictions persisted. Nothing in the trial suggested they had softened. He was also ordered to pay 360,000 euros in compensation. A psychiatric report found his IQ measured at 71, but no sign of mental illness. He has since lodged an appeal. The political aftermath was enormous. Solingen became a central issue in Germany's national election campaign, hardening asylum policy and security rules for public events across the country. 3 people went to a street party to celebrate their city's anniversary and never came home. The country changed its laws, and the man responsible became one of the very small number of people in modern Germany who will almost certainly die in custody. Kyle Clifford, The Whole Life Order, Bushey, Hertfordshire, England, 2024. On June 26, 2024, Louise Hunt ended an 18-month relationship by text message. She was 25. Her boyfriend, Kyle Clifford, was a 26-year-old former soldier, and to her, he appeared to accept it. He did not accept it. Over the following days, he bought a compound crossbow and a butcher knife. On July 9th, he drove to the family home in Bushey, Hertfordshire. Louise's mother, Carol Hunt, 61, answered the door. Clifford told her he was returning some of Louise's belongings. Carol Hunt was the wife of BBC racing commentator John Hunt. She was killed with the knife. Then he waited in that house. When Louise came home, he restrained her with duct tape and held her captive for more than 2 hours. He subjected her to a serious sexual offense, which he would later deny and be convicted of by a jury in 45 minutes. Then he killed her with the crossbow. Her 28-year-old sister Hannah Hunt came home next. She fought him. She managed to raise the alarm before he killed her, and it was that alarm that ultimately led police to him. 3 women, 1 house, roughly 4 hours. A manhunt ran overnight. Clifford was found the next day near his home in Enfield, North London, with self-inflicted injuries. He pleaded guilty to the 3 murders in January of 2025, along with false imprisonment and 2 counts of possessing offensive weapons. He denied the sexual offense. The Crown Prosecution Service decided to try that charge anyway, specifically so that Louise's full experience would be on the record, and so that he could be sentenced for everything he had actually done. The jury took less than an hour. Then he refused to attend his own trial. Then he refused to attend his own sentencing. On March 11, 2025, at Cambridge Crown Court, Justice Joel Benathan sentenced him in his absence. He described Clifford as a jealous man soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt. Then he said this: "For each of these 3 murders, the sentence will be one of life imprisonment with a whole life order. That means a sentence from which you will never be released. Whole life orders are extraordinarily rare in England and Wales. Fewer than 100 people are serving one. There is no minimum term, no parole board, no review. You go in, and you die there." The victim impact statements were read to an empty dock. Amy Hunt, the surviving daughter and sister, spoke about a family of strong women and said Clifford had hated and envied exactly that. She said they were lucky to have loved them for the years they had, and that they will always be a family of 5. John Hunt, who lost his wife and 2 of his 3 daughters in a single afternoon, addressed the man who wasn't there. He said the screams of hell awaited him. He said, "They're going to roll out the red carpet for you." Nicholas Prosper, The Massacre That Didn't Happen, Luton, England, 2024. This case is on the list for something that never occurred. Nicholas Prosper was 19. He lived with his family in a flat in the Lee Bank Tower block on the Marsh Farm estate in Luton. He had failed his A-levels and for roughly a year afterward he had been planning something. He wanted to be the most famous school shooter of the 21st century. Not the deadliest, the most famous. He was explicit about it. He obtained a shotgun and ammunition illegally, and he wrote out a plan for the early hours of September 13th, 2024. The plan had a body count attached, 34 people. His mother, Juliana Falcon, 48. His brother Kyle, 16. His sister Giselle, 13. Then a class of 4-year-old children at his own former primary school, plus 2 teachers. Then himself. He killed his family. Something went wrong at home and he had to do it earlier than he intended. A neighbor, hearing the noise, started knocking repeatedly on the door. That knocking is why this story ends where it does. Prosper fled the flat hours ahead of schedule, several hours before the school would even open. He was walking through Luton with a loaded shotgun and spare cartridges when he encountered police in the street and gestured to them. Body camera footage from his arrest shows his hands still stained with his family's blood. He can be heard repeating that it's not a murder. He pleaded guilty. At Luton Crown Court in March of 2025, Mrs. Justice Chimagrub told him his ambition had been notoriety, that he had wanted to be known posthumously as the world's most famous school shooter of the century, and that the lives of his own mother and younger brother and sister were to be collateral damage on the way to fulfilling it. Then she said the part that reframes the whole case. She said that the deaths of Juliana Falcon, Kyle Prosper, and Giselle Prosper are almost certain to have saved the lives of many children. She said the community owes them its gratitude, and that their memory should be honored. The noise of them dying is what alerted the neighbor. The neighbor is what made him run early. Running early is why a room full of 4-year-olds went to school that morning to a normal day. He was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 49 years. And then Britain argued about it. The Solicitor General referred the sentence to the Court of Appeal as unduly lenient, arguing he should have received a whole life order. Rules changed in 2022 allow whole life orders for defendants aged 18 to 20 in exceptional cases, but no one in that age bracket had ever received one. The appeal was heard in July of 2025. Prosecutors called it exceptional even in the context of murder, 3 people killed, 2 of them children, and a further offense intended against his sister that the court described only in the barest terms. His defense pointed out that with a 49-year minimum, the earliest he could even be considered for parole is in his late 60s. The Lady Chief Justice, Baroness Carr, remarked that no sentence can ever reflect the value of lives lost. The court refused to increase it. He wanted to be remembered. Instead, the people remembered from that night are the 3 who died stopping him. Axel Rudakubana, The Dance Class, Southport, England, 2024, July 29, 2024. A dance and yoga studio called The Heart Space in the seaside town of Southport, Merseyside. It was the school holidays, and there was a Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop running. 26 children were in that room. A 17-year-old walked in with a knife. Bebe King was 6. Elsie Dot Stankham was 7. Alice De Silva Aguiar was 9. All 3 died. 8 other children were seriously injured. So were 2 adults, the dance class leader Leanne Lucas and Jonathan Hayes, a passing businessman who ran in and physically fought him. The prosecutor, Deanna Heer, told Liverpool Crown Court that the injuries inflicted were difficult to explain as anything other than sadistic in nature. Mr. Justice Goose said he was sure Rudakubana had the settled determination to carry out the attack, and that if he had been able to, he would have killed each and every child in that room. All 26. When police arrested him, he told them he was glad those kids were dead, and that it made him happy. The country came apart afterward. Days of nationwide rioting followed the attack, fueled in large part by false information spreading online about who he was. He pleaded guilty in January of 2025, days before his trial was due to start, to 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, possessing terrorist material, and producing ricin. Then came the details that turned this from a crime into a national reckoning. Ruda Cubana had been known to police, to the courts, to social workers, and to mental health services throughout his teenage years. Between the ages of 13 and 14, he had been referred 3 times to PREVENT, the government's anti-radicalization program. 3 times. And he was still out there at 17 with a knife. The Home Secretary announced an independent public inquiry into how a person that thoroughly flagged was not stopped. At sentencing on January 23, 2025, Ruda Cubana had to be removed from the dock for disruptive behavior and then refused to return, so he was sentenced in his absence. His barrister told the court there was no psychiatric evidence that any mental disorder contributed to his actions. He said Ruda Cubana had appeared to be a normal, well-disciplined child until he was about 13, and then made a transition into someone capable of this. Mr. Justice Goose handed down 13 life sentences with a minimum term of 52 years. He could not impose a whole life order, and he said so directly. If Ruda Cubana had been 18 at the time, he would have received one. He was 17. The law would not allow it. He was months short of never getting out on paper. Members of the public asked the Attorney General to refer the sentence as unduly lenient. Lord Hermer refused, but he explained why in terms that mattered. He said it was the second longest sentence imposed by the courts in English history, and he said Ruda Cubana will likely never be released and will spend the rest of his life in jail. 52 years. He'll be 69 before a parole board is even permitted to look at him, and there is no expectation he'll walk. 2 of the families called him pure evil in their statements and said his actions had left them in continuous pain. Merseyside police spent months afterward investigating whether anyone had helped him or failed to prevent him. After what they called a comprehensive review, they announced no further charges would be brought. Here's what connects all 18 of these cases, and it isn't the sentences. It's that almost every single one of them was seen coming. Colt Gray's family had a visit from police because he'd threatened an elementary school, and then his father bought him the rifle. Ethan Crumbly drew a picture begging for help, and his parents were shown it hours before he opened fire. Axel Ruda Cubana was referred to a counter-terrorism program 3 separate times before he turned 15. Isa al-Hassan was ordered deported and simply walked away from his accommodation while nobody followed up. Jesse Osborne was in an online group where teenagers openly discussed shooting up their schools. Peyton Gendron wrote hundreds of pages about exactly what he was going to do and then did it. The system didn't miss these people. The system met them, wrote them down, and let them go. And here's the second thing, which is stranger and newer. Look at the ages: 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20. Almost none of these people had finished growing when they did what they did. And courts across 4 countries have now written down, in formal legal language, that a specific 14-year-old is permanently incorrigible, that a 16-year-old is beyond rehabilitation, that an 18-year-old is irretrievably depraved. Those are judgments about the future. A judge is being asked to look at a child and say with confidence what that person will be at 50, at 70, at the end. No other area of law asks anyone to do that. Every generation gets the killers it deserves, and this generation's killers grew up with an audience. They filmed it. They live-streamed it. They compared their coverage from jail phones. Colt Gray checked whether he was more popular than another shooter. Nicholas Prosper wanted a title. They didn't just want people dead, they wanted people watching, which puts the rest of us in an uncomfortable position because they were right. We are watching. That's what this video is. The difference, and it's the only one that matters, is which names you take with you when you close this app. Not theirs. Bebe King, Alice Da Silva Aguiar, Elsie Dot Stancombe, Cynthia Hoffman, Tristan Bailey, Blaze Bernstein, Yumna Afzal, Jacob Hall, Bart and Krista Halderson, Colson Sisk, who is 6 months old, Cooper Roberts, who is 8 and will never walk again. They wanted to be remembered. Remember the wrong people on purpose. If you made it this far, drop a comment with the case that stayed with you, and tell me honestly whether you think any 14-year-old should ever be told they're finished. Subscribe for more from Primetime Crime, and I'll see you in the next one.